Hospitals, places of healing of last resort. But beneath the antiseptic veneer, what darker currents flow when the lights go out and the hallways fall silent? Welcome, observers of the unsettling, to Nightmare True Horror. Tonight, we pull back the sterile curtain on 7 true stories where the line between care and terror blurred. What chilling whispers have you overheard in those hushed corridors? The comments await your own unsettling diagnoses. If the thought of what truly transpires in these institutional shadows intrigues you, consider this your summons to subscribe. For the cases we're about to dissect are particularly grim, and a most disturbing prognosis awaits those who remain to witness the final, critical reveal. I first noticed it late at night. The faint squeak of rubber-soled shoes passing quietly by my hospital room. It was barely audible, just a whisper against the sterile silence of the hallway. But something about that sound made my heart skip. Maybe it was the meds from surgery, but it felt off, unsettling in a way I couldn't place. I glanced toward the doorway, squinting through the dim glow of medical monitors, but saw nothing. Only darkness stared back, silent and watchful. My name's Ethan. Last week, I was in a car accident outside Columbus, Ohio. A drunk driver slammed into my side. I survived with a fractured leg and a badly bruised torso. Now I lay trapped in this hospital bed, confined to a semi-private room, tethered to IV drips and beeping machines. My roommate was a frail old man named Arthur. He was polite but distant, spending his days staring at the ceiling and mumbling quietly to himself. Nurses told me he'd been here a while, mostly keeping to himself. I didn't mind. I wasn't much for conversation anyway. But on my second night, Arthur broke his silence. His voice was soft, cracked like dry leaves. "Be careful, Ethan." The orderly, the one with the scar on his hand. "Don't trust him." I blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about?" He turned slowly toward me, pale eyes wide with fearful clarity. "I've seen things at night, things he does when nobody's watching. He hurts people." I felt goosebumps crawl up my arms. I didn't believe him. Not really. Arthur was old, possibly confused, but his trembling voice lingered in my thoughts. The next morning, Arthur's bed was empty, sheets stripped clean, mattress sanitized as if he never existed. He never existed. When I asked, the nurse gave me a vague reply, smiling absently. "He was transferred," she said, avoiding eye contact. Something twisted deep inside me. Why had nobody said anything earlier? Hours later, the squeak returned. I looked up as an orderly wheeled in a new patient, bed rolling silently. I noticed the orderly's hands first, broad, muscular, with a jagged, pale scar across the knuckles. My stomach tightened painfully. He caught my stare and smiled, a practiced expression that didn't touch his eyes. "Much better," he said quietly, glancing at the empty bed beside me. "Now we can finally talk properly." An icy chill ran through me, but I forced a weak smile. "Do I know you?" His eyes narrowed slightly, the smile becoming colder. "Not yet, but I've been watching you. You seem interesting." The next 2 days blurred in a haze of anxiety. He appeared regularly, always hovering near the doorway, watching. He'd linger in the shadows of the hall, eyes following me with unnerving intensity, always with that unsettling smile. Small, strange things began happening. Personal items shifted position slightly. My wallet moved inches away from where I'd placed it. My phone mysteriously relocated to the bedside table overnight. Each time I blamed the medication, sleep deprivation, or paranoia. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Late one evening, I jolted awake, gasping sharply, drenched in sweat. Something had touched my leg, cold, rough fingers gripping my ankle briefly before releasing, heart hammering. I scanned the dark room. The door swung silently closed. Someone had been inside. The next morning, I requested a nurse. She listened sympathetically, taking notes but dismissing my fears with practiced reassurance. "It's the meds," she explained gently. "They can cause vivid dreams." Was I losing my mind? Was it paranoia? Or had Arthur been right? That night, determined to prove myself sane, I stayed awake, eyes fixed on the door. Hours dragged agonizingly, exhaustion weighing heavily on my eyelids, but I refused to surrender. Just past midnight, the door eased open silently. The orderly slipped inside, illuminated briefly by the corridor's dim lights. He approached quietly, glancing cautiously toward my bed. I lay still, heart pounding furiously, pretending to sleep. He stood over my new roommate, leaning close, whispering something indistinct. The roommate stirred uneasily, groaning softly. Then I saw it clearly, an empty syringe, glinously in the orderly's scarred hand. Panic surged, adrenaline overriding pain and injury. Without thinking, I jerked upright and shouted, voice raw with fear, "Stop! What are you doing?" He spun toward me, startled anger flashing in his eyes. His calm facade shattered momentarily, revealing something feral and dangerous beneath. "You shouldn't have seen that," he hissed, advancing rapidly toward me. I lunged desperately toward the emergency button, smashing my palm against it as he seized my wrist, wrenching painfully. The room erupted with alarms, red lights pulsing urgently. Noises burst in moments later, cows ensuing as they shouted for security. He was dragged away, thrashing violently, eyes locked fiercely onto mine until he disappeared from view. Police investigated thoroughly, uncovering grim details. The orderly, whose real name was Michael Green, had been quietly preying on vulnerable patients for months, stealing medication, causing deliberate harm, feeding his twisted power. Arthur had tried warning staff, but nobody believed the confused old man. He'd been right all along, but now he was gone. Weeks passed, wounds slowly healing, but scars remained unseen. Nightmares returned nightly, his hands gripping my ankle, his cold eyes watching silently, his smile haunting every shadow. I moved to a new city, a new job, trying desperately to reclaim normalcy. Yet the sensation lingered, the paranoia unrelenting. Every hospital, every doctor's office, every smiling stranger sparked panic deep within me. Yesterday I received a letter. No return address, neatly printed, chillingly familiar handwriting. You think distance can protect you? I'll see you again soon. Now each night as darkness descends, I lie awake, heart racing, every creak and whisper filling me with dread. Because deep down I know he's still out there waiting patiently, and next time I won't be lucky enough to escape. The sterile walls of a hospital can hide the most chilling secrets, can't they? If that story made your pulse quicken, just wait until you hear what's lurking in the next patient's file. The fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor flickered with a rhythmic buzz that matched my heartbeat, casting intermittent shadows across the polished linoleum floor. I lay in bed 314, staring at the ceiling tiles and counting the water stains that looked like abstract art in the dim light. Sleep had been elusive since my gallbladder surgery 3 days ago, leaving me hypersensitive to every sound that echoed through the halls of Sacred Heart Medical Center. That's when I first heard it, a soft whistling drifting from somewhere down the hallway, a tune I couldn't identify, but that seemed oddly familiar. The melody was cheerful, almost childlike, but something about hearing it at 3:17 a.m. in an empty hospital ward made my skin crawl. I pressed the call button, but no one came. The whistling continued for maybe 5 minutes, then faded, as if whoever was making it had moved to another floor. I tried to convince myself it was just a night shift worker trying to stay alert, but the hair on my arms remained standing long after the sound disappeared. My name is David Chen, and I'm a 38-year-old accountant who'd never spent more than a few hours in a hospital before this week. The laparoscopic surgery had gone smoothly, but complications with my pain medication meant an extended stay in the surgical recovery ward. What should have been a 2-day procedure had stretched into 5 days of sleepless nights and mounting anxiety. The whistling returned the next night at exactly 3:15 a.m. This time I was ready, phone in hand to record it. But the melody was different, still cheerful, still unsettling. It seemed to move down the hallway methodically, pausing at certain doors before continuing. I could hear keys jingling softly, the sound of locks turning, doors opening and closing. During the day, I asked my nurse, Patricia, about the night maintenance staff. She was a heavy-set woman with kind eyes who'd been working the ward for 15 years. "Oh, that's just Eddie," she said, adjusting my IV drip. "He's been here forever. Keeps to himself, works the graveyard shift. Harmless as they come." But something in her tone suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with Eddie either. The third night, I was ready. I had positioned myself near the door, leaving it slightly ajar so I could peer into the hallway. At 3:12 a.m., the whistling began again. Closer this time, definitely on my floor. I watched as a figure emerged from the stairwell, pushing a large cart filled with cleaning supplies. Eddie was shorter than I'd expected, maybe in his 50s, with thinning gray hair and the kind of institutional uniform that made him invisible in the hospital environment. He moved with practiced efficiency, checking doors, using keys from a massive ring attached to his belt. The whistling never stopped, that same cheerful melody that now made my teeth ache. He paused outside room 316, the empty room next to mine. I'd been told it was out of service for maintenance, but I'd never seen any work being done. Eddie pulled out his keys, found the right one, and unlocked the door. The whistling stopped abruptly. For 20 minutes, I heard nothing but the distant hum of medical equipment and the occasional footstep. Then the door opened again, and Eddie emerged, still pushing his cart. But now there was something different. A faint smell that hadn't been there before, sweet and cloying, like flowers mixed with antiseptic. He locked the door behind him, pocketed his keys, and resumed whistling as he continued down the hallway. The next morning, I called the hospital's maintenance department for my room phone. A tired-sounding supervisor told me that room 316 wasn't scheduled for any maintenance work. According to their records, it had been empty for 2 weeks, waiting for new carpet installation that kept getting delayed. "Is there a janitor named Eddie who works nights?" I asked. "Eddie Marsh." "Yeah. Been here about 8 years. Why? Just curious. I've been having trouble sleeping, and I hear him working late." "That's odd. Eddie's been on vacation for the past week. His replacement doesn't start until Monday." The phone felt heavy in my hands. If Eddie was on vacation, who was whistling in the hallways? Who had keys to the empty room next door? That night, I made sure my door was locked and positioned myself where I could see the hallway through the crack. At 3:10 a.m., the whistling began again. But this time, I was ready with my phone's camera. The figure approached. Same height, same uniform, same set of keys. But when he passed under the hallway light, I could see his face clearly. This wasn't Eddie. This was someone else wearing Eddie's uniform, carrying Eddie's keys, following Eddie's routine. I watched him unlock room 316 again. But this time he went to his cart and pulled out something that made my blood freeze. A large black bag, the kind used for medical waste, but longer and wider, human-sized. He wheeled it into the room with practiced efficiency, whistling that same cheerful tune. The bag was heavy. I could tell by the way he had to maneuver it, the way it sagged and shifted as he pushed it through the doorway. My hands shook as I tried to film, but the angle was wrong, the lighting too dim. All I captured was a blurry figure, and the sound of that damned whistling. 15 minutes later, he emerged empty-handed, locked the door, and continued his rounds. The sweet smell was stronger now, unmistakable even through my closed door. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by my window, phone in hand, trying to convince myself I'd imagined what I'd seen, but the smell lingered, and I could still hear that cheerful whistling echoing in my mind. The next morning, I demanded to speak with hospital security. The guard who came to my room was a young man named Marcus, who listened to my story with growing skepticism. "So you think someone is using the empty room next door to... what exactly?" I don't know, but someone has been going in there at night, and they brought a bag that looked like it contained a body." Marcus checked his clipboard. "Mr. Chen, you're scheduled for discharge today. The medication you've been on can sometimes cause hallucinations or paranoid thoughts. It's a common side effect." "I'm not hallucinating," I insisted. "Check the room. Smell the room. Something is wrong." To his credit, Marcus did check. He came back 20 minutes later, his expression more serious. "The room is empty," he said. but there's definitely an odor. We're going to have maintenance take a look. I was discharged that afternoon, but I couldn't let it go. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, waiting for the night shift to begin. At 11 p.m., I saw him, the fake Eddie, entering through the staff entrance with his cart, wearing the same uniform, carrying the same keys. I called 911 from my car, but when the police arrived, they found nothing. No body, no bag, no evidence of any wrongdoing. The man claiming to be Eddie produced identification, work schedules, and supervisory references. Everything checked out, except the real Eddie Marsh was found dead in his apartment 3 days later, where he'd been for over a week. Natural causes, the coroner ruled. A heart attack. But that meant someone had been impersonating him, using his identity, his keys, his routine. The investigation into the hospital incidents went nowhere. Security footage from the relevant nights had been mysteriously erased. The imposter had vanished as completely as he'd appeared. Room 316 was thoroughly cleaned and renovated, but workers reported finding strange stains in the subflooring that required special chemical treatment. I never learned who the imposter was or what he was doing in that room. But 6 months later, Sacred Heart Medical Center quietly shut down their night maintenance program, citing security concerns and staffing irregularities. I still drive past the hospital sometimes, late at night, and I swear I can hear it. That cheerful whistling carried on the wind, the sound of keys jingling, the creak of wheels on linoleum. Because some sounds, once heard, never really fade. Last week, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, there was only silence, and the faint sound of someone whistling a cheerful tune before the line went dead. I've changed my phone number twice since then, but the calls keep coming. Always the same time, 3:15 a.m. Always the same tune, because some people never really leave their jobs. They just find new places to practice their trade, new hospitals to haunt, new patients to watch through cracked doors, and sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if I'm the only one who knows what Eddie's replacement was really doing in that empty room, or if there are other patients in other hospitals lying awake at 3 a.m., listening to the sound of whistling in the hallway, and wondering what's in the bag being wheeled into the room next door. Every hospital has its unwritten rules and its untold horrors. That was just one unsettling diagnosis. Prepare yourself for another terrifying ward. The only light in the room came from the digital clock on the bedside table, its angry red numbers burning a hole in the darkness. 3:17 a.m. The air was sterile, chilled, and unnaturally still. Hospitals are supposed to be noisy, full of beeps and intercom announcements. But this wing was different. It was a place defined by silence. I was in a private room on the 4th floor, a sort of no man's land between the general medical wing and the locked doors of the psychiatric ward. A bad reaction to a new anxiety medication had landed me here for a 72-hour observation. My heart had hammered out a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My thoughts had turned into a thick, soupy fog. It was terrifying, but the doctor assured me it was temporary. This room, this observation, was just a precaution. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic squeak. Squeak, squeak, coming from down the polished hallway. The sound of a single rubber wheel on a cart, moving slowly, deliberately. It grew closer, then stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, listening. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than before. I told myself it was just a nurse on their rounds, but the complete absence of any other sound, a door opening footsteps, a cough, felt wrong. It felt like I was being listened to. The door handle turned with an almost imperceptible click. It wasn't a nurse. The man who slipped into my room was a whisper of a person, gaunt and pale in the faint glow from the hallway. He wore the same standard-issue hospital gown as me, but his eyes were ancient, filled with a frantic hunted terror that made the hairs on my arms stand up. He moved with a practiced silence, a ghost gliding across the linoleum. He didn't look at me, Not at first. He went to the window, peering through the blinds at the sleeping city below. Then he turned, and his gaze locked onto mine. He raised a single, trembling finger to his lips, then drifted closer to my bed, his bare feet making no sound. He leaned in, and the smell of antiseptic soap and fear washed over me. "Listen to me," he whispered, his voice a dry, rasping thing. "This place, it's not about making us better. It's about making us quieter. It's about making us quieter." My heart began its frantic drumming again. I was trapped in bed, my limbs feeling heavy and useless. "The morning nurse," he continued, his eyes darting toward the door. "She'll bring you pills, a little white one, and a red one. She'll say the red one is for anxiety." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to an almost inaudible hiss. "It's not. Don't take the red pills. Not ever. No matter what they tell you." And then, as silently as he appeared, he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving me alone in the oppressive, listening dark. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was a hallucination, a lingering side effect of the medication. The psych ward was just down the hall after all. A confused patient must have wandered into my room. It was disturbing, but explainable. Then Nurse Davis came in. She was cheerful, her smile a little too bright for 7 a.m. In a small paper cup, she held 2 pills. One was small and white. The other was a bright, candy-red capsule. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she chirped. "Dr. Albright wants you to take these." The white one is a mild anti-inflammatory, and the red one is just a little something to take the edge off your anxiety. My blood ran cold. I stared at the red pill, a tiny gleaming ruby of dread. The man's haunted eyes flashed in my mind. "No matter what they tell you, I think I'll pass on the anxiety one," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm feeling much better." Nurse Davis's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, it's no trouble. Doctor's orders. It'll help you rest." Her cheerfulness suddenly felt brittle, rehearsed. I took the pills, but as she turned to make a note on my chart, I palmed the red one, slipping it into the pocket of my pajama pants. I swallowed the white one with a gulp of water. She left, humming, and I was left with a secret, a small, hard capsule that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Over the next day, I started watching. I saw patients being led down the hall, their movements slow, their faces slack and expressionless. They were quiet, too quiet. One woman shuffled past my open door, her eyes fixed on nothing, a thin line of drool tracing a path from the corner of her lips. I recognized the look. It was the same vacant placidity I'd seen in the eyes of the man who had warned me. I started hiding the red pills, one in my pocket, the next one tucked inside the spine of the Gideon's Bible on the nightstand. Paranoia became my constant companion. I felt the staff's eyes on me. Their smiles seemed like masks, their reassuring words like carefully crafted lies. Was I going crazy? Was this the paranoia they were trying to treat? Or was I the only sane person in a world that had gone quietly mad? On the 3rd day, my last day of observation, Dr. Albright came to see me. He was a kind, fatherly man who had always treated me with patience. Today, he seemed different. Tense. "You're still reporting high levels of anxiety, son," he said, looking at my chart, but not at me. "I think we need a more aggressive approach to help you relax before you go home. I'm authorizing a stronger dose." "No," I said, the word coming out louder than I intended. "I'm fine. I don't want any more medication." Dr. Albright put the chart down and finally looked at me. His friendly paternal expression was gone. His eyes were cold, clinical. It was like watching a mask fall off. "You're not fine," he said, his voice flat. "You're agitated. You need to be quieted." He pressed the call button. A moment later, a large, stone-faced orderly I'd seen shuffling the quiet patients around appeared at the door. He was holding a syringe. "This will only take a moment," Dr. Albright said, taking the syringe. "Just a little something to help you rest." Terror, pure and undiluted, flooded every cell in my body. This was it. This was the moment my reality fractured. I wasn't a patient. I was a problem to be solved. a voice to be silenced. I scrambled to the far side of the bed, putting the mattress between us. "Get away from me," I yelled. Suddenly, a crash echoed from the hallway. A metal cart overturned, followed by shouting. The orderly's head snapped toward the sound. Dr. Albright hesitated, syringe in hand. In that moment of distraction, the man with the haunted eyes appeared in my doorway. He wasn't silent this time. He was roaring a wild, incoherent scream of defiance. He launched himself at the orderly, a whirlwind of flailing limbs and desperate fury. It wasn't a fight. It was a sacrifice. He was giving me a chance. I didn't wait. I bolted out the door, past the chaos, and ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran, my bare feet slapping against the cold floor. I burst through the double doors at the end of the hall and found myself in the bright, busy lobby of the main hospital. I was safe. I was surrounded by witnesses. An investigation followed, of course. It was all very quiet, very professional. The hospital concluded that the other patient, a man with a long history of paranoid delusions, had suffered a psychotic break. Dr. Albright, they claimed, was merely trying to administer a prescribed sedative to me, an increasingly agitated and non-compliant patient. It was my word against a respected doctor's. They were all transferred. The doctor, the nurse, the orderly, all quietly reassigned. I was released with a formal apology for the unfortunate incident. I try not to think about it now. I finished college. I have a job. I tell myself it was a nightmare, a brief psychotic episode brought on by a bad drug interaction. But I know it wasn't, because last night, while doing laundry, I felt something small and hard in the pocket of an old pair of pajama pants I hadn't worn in years. I pulled it out. It was a single candy red capsule. I held it up to the fluorescent light of my kitchen, and all I could think about were the quiet ones, the ones who didn't have a ghost to scream for them. And I wondered how many of them are still out there, resting peacefully, their voices forever silenced. The echoes of that hospital stay still linger in the empty halls. But there are more desperate screams and chilling whispers waiting. Get ready for another true horror story from the medical world. The hospital basement smelled like bleach and damp concrete, a maze of flickering fluorescent lights and unmarked doors. I was rushing to find the pathology lab, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. It was my first week as a medical resident, and I was already lost. The hallway stretched endlessly, pipes groaning overhead like a distant moan. Then I heard it. A faint scratching, like nails dragging across metal, coming from somewhere deep in the corridor. I froze, my stethoscope swinging against my chest. Probably just a loose pipe, I told myself. But my pulse quickened. The air felt heavy, like someone was standing just out of sight watching me. Why did this place feel so wrong? I'm Claire, 28, fresh out of med school, and thrown into the chaos of Chicago's oldest city hospital on March 24. The place was a relic, built in the 1800s, with a basement that felt like it hadn't been touched since. I was supposed to deliver a patient chart to the lab, but the signs were useless, faded arrows pointing to nowhere. My phone had no signal down here, and the map on the wall was a scribbled mess. I just wanted to drop off the chart and get back upstairs to the living. But that scratching sound kept pulling my attention, faint but persistent, like a plea. I turned a corner, and the air grew colder, sharp enough to sting my nose. The sign above read Morgue. Great. Exactly where I didn't want to be. The door was heavy, steel, and creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the room was a wall of refrigerated units, each one labeled with a number. The attendant's desk was empty, a half-eaten sandwich sitting next to a flickering monitor. The scratching was louder now, unmistakable, coming from one of the units. Unit 12, slightly ajar, its handle gleaming under the dim lights. My stomach twisted. Hello? I called, my voice echoing. No answer, just that weak, rhythmic scrape. Nails on metal, slowing down. I told myself it was nothing. A rat? Maybe. Stuck in a vent. But my feet moved toward the unit, drawn by some stupid curiosity. The air was frigid, my breath visible in clouds. I reached for the handle, then hesitated. What if it wasn't a rat? What if it was Something else. I shook my head. Get it together, Claire, I muttered. I was a doctor, not some kid scared of the dark. But the scratching stopped, replaced by a soft, wet gurgle. My heart slammed against my ribs. I grabbed the handle, my fingers numb, and pulled. The drawer slid out, heavy and slow. Inside was a body bag, zipped shut, but something was moving inside. Small, desperate twitches. My hands shook as I unzipped it, the sound of the zipper deafening in the silence. A man's face stared up at me, pale, eyes wide with terror. He was alive, his lips blue, his fingers clawing weakly at the bag. "Help!" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. I stumbled back, my scream caught in my throat. The bag was soaked with sweat, the air thick with the smell of fear and metal. I ran to the desk, fumbling for the phone. Dead. No dial tone. My phone still had no signal. The man's gasps grew fainter, his fingers twitching less. I sprinted back, dragging the bag fully open. He was in his 30s, gaunt, with needle marks dotting his arms. "Who did this?" I demanded, checking his pulse. Weak, erratic. He tried to speak, but only blood bubbled from his lips. Then I saw it. A folded note tucked into his shirt pocket. I grabbed it, my hands shaking, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "You're next, Dr. Harper." My blood ran cold. That was my name. How did they know my name? I spun around, the morgue shadows stretching across the walls. The door was still open, the hallway beyond dark and silent. Too silent. I dragged the man out of the drawer, his body limp, heavier than I expected. I laid him on the floor, starting CPR, my hands slipping in his sweat. "Stay with me," I begged, but his eyes were glazing over. The lights flickered, and a soft thud echoed from the hallway. Like a door closing, I froze, my hands still on his chest. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, clicked down the corridor. Not the heavy boots of a security guard, something lighter, calculated. I grabbed the note, stuffing it into my pocket, and ducked behind the desk. The footsteps stopped just outside the morgue. My breath hitched, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. The door creaked, inching open. A shadow stretched across the floor, long and thin, holding something. A syringe, glinting in the light. Was I overreacting? No, this was real. Someone had locked that man in a body bag, left him to suffocate, and now they were coming for me. I clutched a pen from the desk, the only weapon I had. The shadow moved closer, the syringe gleaming. I held my breath, my muscles screaming to run. Then the lights went out, plunging the morgue into darkness. A low chuckle filled the air, cold and sharp, like a blade. I bolted, tripping over the man's body, my hands scraping the icy floor. The footsteps were faster now, chasing me. I sprinted into the hallway, the darkness swallowing everything. I sprinted into the hallway, the darkness swallowing everything. My hands grazed the walls, searching for a door, a stairwell, anything. The scratching stuttered again, not from the morgue, but behind me, like nails on the concrete. I found a door, yanking it open, and stumbled into a stairwell. The footsteps were right behind me, too close. I ran up the stairs, my legs burning, my lungs screaming. I burst onto the main floor, the hospital's bustle a jarring contrast. Nurses stared as I gasped for air, my scrubs soaked with sweat. "Call security!" I shouted, collapsing against a wall. They found the man in the morgue, dead, his body cold by the time help arrived. The note was gone, either lost in my panic or taken. The police questioned me for hours, their faces skeptical. The man was a John Doe, a known addict, no ID. The morgue attendant, a quiet guy named Carl, swore had been on break, saw nothing. But I remembered his eyes when I'd passed him earlier that day. Cold, lingering too long. They never found the person with the syringe. The hospital called it a prank, a mix-up, but I knew better. Someone had targeted that man, and now they knew my name. I transferred to another hospital, quit night shifts, but the fear never left. Every creak in my apartment, every shadow in a hallway, makes my heart race. I keep a knife under my pillow now. Check the locks 3 times a night, and sometimes, when it's quiet, I hear it again. That faint, rhythmic scratching, like fingernails on metal, calling me back to the dark. It's unnerving to think these incidents play out in places meant for healing. And believe me, the next chart we open holds an even more disturbing prognosis. The recovery room materialized around me like a photograph developing in slow motion. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead with a sickly buzz that seemed to vibrate through my skull. And the antiseptic smell burned my nostrils with each shallow breath. My mouth felt stuffed with cotton, every swallow a struggle against the lingering metallic taste of anesthesia. The gallbladder surgery was supposed to be routine. In and out, they'd promised. But something felt wrong. A soft whisper drifted from somewhere near my bed, barely audible above the steady beeping of monitors. Perfect match. Same build, same insurance coverage. The words seemed to dissolve before I could grasp their meaning, leaving only a cold unease settling in my chest like ice water. When I forced my heavy eyelids open, searching for the source of the voice, I saw only empty chairs and the dim glow of medical equipment casting eerie shadows on beige walls. My name is Michael Torres, and I'm a 32-year-old construction supervisor from Phoenix. 3 days ago, I checked into Desert Valley Medical Center for what should have been a straightforward laparoscopic procedure. I'd researched the surgeon, read the reviews, filled out every form twice. Everything had seemed professional, routine, safe. Now, lying here with my thoughts swimming through pharmaceutical fog, that certainty felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. The door opened with a soft pneumatic hiss, and a nurse entered carrying a metal tray. Her movements were too precise, too deliberate, like someone following a script rather than providing care. She wore the standard blue scrubs, but something about her felt wrong. The way she avoided eye contact, the slight tremor in her hands as she prepared a syringe. "Good morning, Robert," she said, her voice flat and oddly mechanical. "Time for your medication." Robert? The name hit me like a slap. I tried to speak, to correct her, but my throat was raw from intubation, producing only a weak rasp. She didn't seem to notice my distress. Her attention focused entirely on the clear liquid she was drawing into the syringe. The needle caught the harsh fluorescent light, gleaming like a tiny sword. "This will help with the pain, Robert," she continued, moving closer to my bedside. Her name tag read, K. Stevens Arn. But something about the way she carried herself suggested this wasn't her real identity. The room felt colder suddenly, despite the warm blankets tucked around my legs. I managed to lift my arm, the one with the hospital wristband, and stared at it with growing horror. The plastic band was crisp and white, printed with bold black letters that definitely didn't spell my name. Instead, I read, Robert Chen. Below that, a patient ID number I'd never seen, a birth date that was wrong by 3 years, and a list of allergies that weren't mine. Morphine, latex, codeine. My actual allergies were to shellfish and bee stings. Information that could be the difference between life and death if they gave me the wrong medication. But this wasn't about medical errors. The precision of the switch, the isolated room, the nurse's strange behavior. This was something far more sinister. Nurse Stevens paused when she saw me staring at the wristband. Her eyes met mine, and I saw something cold and calculating in her gaze that made my blood freeze. She looked at the band, then back at me, and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of a death sentence. "It's better for everyone if you just relax, Robert." The way she emphasized the wrong name felt like a threat wrapped in false comfort. I tried to pull my arm away, but the IV tubes restricted my movement, and my muscles felt like they were filled with lead. My heart rate monitor began beeping faster, the sound echoing off the walls like an alarm no one would answer. "Where's the real Robert?" I managed to croak, my voice barely above a whisper. Her smile was thin and cold. "Robert Chen died this morning from surgical complications. Very sad. His family will be devastated when they hear. She moved the syringe closer to my IV port. But his life insurance policy will provide some comfort. $2 million is a lot of money. The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. This wasn't random. This was a carefully orchestrated murder scheme. Someone had paid to have Robert Chen killed, and I'd been selected as his replacement. The surgery, the wrong wristband, the isolated recovery room. It was all part of an elaborate plan to commit insurance fraud through identity theft and murder. His wife hired you, I whispered, understanding flooding through me. Mr. Stevens nodded approvingly, as if I were a student who'd finally grasped a difficult concept. Patricia Chen stands to inherit quite a sum. And Robert, well, Robert was supposed to die on the operating table, but there were complications with the anesthesia. He survived, so we needed a substitute. I looked around desperately for anything I could use as a weapon, or a way to call for help. The call button was on the opposite side of the bed, and my legs felt like jelly. The IV stand was within reach, but I was connected to it by multiple tubes, carrying fluids I couldn't identify. Oh, you can't just murder people in a hospital, I said, trying to buy time. She laughed, a sound devoid of humor. You'd be surprised how easy it is. Medical errors happen all the time. Wrong medication, allergic reactions, post-operative infections. The death certificate will list complications from your gallbladder surgery. Very tragic for such a young man. That's when I noticed the silence. The usual bustle of a hospital recovery ward was absent. No voices in the hallway. No sounds of medical equipment from neighboring rooms. No nurses making rounds. It was as if this entire wing had been cleared out specifically for this moment. With a surge of desperate adrenaline, I grabbed the IV stand with both hands and swung it toward her. She dodged, but the metal pole caught her shoulder and sent her stumbling backward. The syringe flew from her hand and shattered against the wall, its contents spreading in a clear puddle on the linoleum floor. "Security," she shouted, but her voice carried panic now instead of confidence. "Security. We have a combative patient in room 318. I knew she was still playing her role, making it seem like I was having a post-surgical episode. When help arrived, who would they believe? A trained medical professional or a groggy patient claiming to be someone else? The door burst open, and 2 security guards rushed in, but behind them came someone I hadn't expected, a police detective, badge visible on his belt. Nurse Stevens went pale. "Detective Morrison," she stammered. "What are you doing here?" "Following up on a missing person report," he said grimly. "Robert Chen never made it home from his doctor's appointment yesterday. His real wife, not the woman who's been calling herself Patricia Chen, filed the report this morning." The elaborate scheme unraveled quickly after that. The real Patricia Chen had been murdered 3 weeks earlier, her identity stolen by a woman named Kelly Stevens, a former nurse who'd lost her license for drug theft. The fake Patricia had married Robert Chen under false pretenses, taken out a massive life insurance policy, then arranged for his murder. I'd been selected because I matched Robert's general physical description and was scheduled for surgery on the same day. The plan was to kill me with a lethal injection, then claim that Robert Chen had died from surgical complications. The fake widow would collect the insurance money and disappear. The investigation revealed that this wasn't Kelly Stevens' first attempt at this type of fraud. She'd been linked to suspicious deaths in 3 other states, always involving identity theft and insurance fraud. The hospital had unknowingly provided the perfect cover, a place where death was common enough that one more wouldn't raise immediate suspicion. Kelly Stevens was arrested and eventually convicted of multiple counts of murder and fraud. The hospital faced federal investigations and massive lawsuits for their security failures. I survived, but the experience left scars that went deeper than my surgical incision. Now every time I enter a medical facility, I photograph my wristband with my phone. I verify my identity with multiple staff members. I insist on seeing my medical records before any procedure, because I learned that in a place where people trust their lives to strangers, that trust can become a weapon in the wrong hands. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder about the real Robert Chen, a man whose only crime was trusting the wrong person. His body was never found, and Kelly Stevens never revealed what happened to him. Somewhere out there, A family is still waiting for answers that may never come. The most terrifying part isn't that monsters exist. It's that they wear scrubs and carry stethoscopes, hiding in plain sight among those sworn to heal. And every time I close my eyes, I can still hear that cold mechanical voice saying, "It's better for everyone if you just relax, Robert." Because in the end, I survived by refusing to relax, by fighting when everything in my body wanted to surrender. But how many others didn't fight hard enough? How many other Roberts are out there, wearing the wrong name, trusting the wrong nurse, never knowing that their next breath might be their last? The worst part of a long hospital stay isn't the pain or the bad food. It's the boredom. For 2 weeks, my world had been reduced to the 4 beige walls of a semi-private room on the 3rd floor. My leg elevated in a traction device that looked like a medieval torture rack. A motorcycle accident had shattered my tibia, and my only entertainment was watching the slow, monotonous life of the ward unfold. My roommate was a quiet, elderly man named Arthur Gable. He was in for pneumonia, and he spent most of his time sleeping or staring out the window. He had a kind, weary face and hands gnarled with arthritis. After a week, he was discharged. A nurse wheeled him out while he gave me a weak but genuine smile. "Good luck to you, son," he'd rasped. The next day, while staring out into the hallway, I saw him. Or I thought I did. He was sitting in the vinyl chairs of the waiting area, just at the edge of the ward's double doors. I figured he was waiting for a prescription or a follow-up, but he was still there when my lunch arrived. And still there when the afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows. He was just sitting there, staring, his gaze fixed on the entrance to our ward. I didn't think much of it at first, but when he was there again the next morning, in the exact same chair, wearing the same tweed jacket, a prickle of unease started to crawl up my spine. He wasn't reading. He wasn't on a phone. He was perfectly still, a statue of a man, his attention laser-focused on the doorway. It was like watching a predator waiting patiently by a watering hole. By the 4th day, it was my obsession. Every time I looked, he was there, immovable, watchful. I tried to wave at him once, a little gesture of camaraderie. He didn't even blink. His eyes, even from a distance, seemed unnervingly vacant, yet intensely focused. The other visitors and staff flowed around him, as if he were a rock in a stream. I finally mentioned it to a young nurse named Chloe. She was kind, the sort of person who didn't dismiss you when you were feeling helpless and paranoid. "The man who was in this bed before me, Mr. Gable," I said, trying to sound casual. "He's been sitting in the waiting room for 4 days straight. He just stares." Chloe frowned. "That's odd. Let me look into it." She came back an hour later, after the shift change. The bustling energy of the ward had died down. She drew the thin curtain around my bed, enclosing us in a little tent of privacy. The gesture itself sent a jolt of alarm through me. I don't know how to say this," she started, her voice a low, nervous whisper. Her face was pale, her professional cheerfulness completely gone. I looked up the patient Arthur Gable from this room. She took a deep breath, her eyes darting toward the hallway as if she were afraid of being overheard. "According to the hospital's records," she said, her voice barely audible, "Mr. Gable suffered a massive coronary event the night he was discharged. He never left the hospital. He passed away in this very room 2 weeks ago." The air in the small curtained space turned thick and cold. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought of the man in the tweed jacket, the watcher in the waiting room. If Arthur Gable was dead, who had I been watching for the past 4 days? My paranoia bloomed into full-blown terror. The hospital, once a place of healing, now felt like a trap. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. The night orderly, a large man who always avoided my gaze, now seemed menacing. When I asked another nurse about the man in the waiting room, she just gave me a tight, dismissive smile and said, "Visitors come and go, honey." I felt like I was losing my mind. Was I the only one who saw him? Was this some kind of phantom, a hallucination brought on by pain and medication? But he was real. I could see the worn patch on the elbow of his jacket, I could see the way the fluorescent lights reflected off his polished shoes. He was flesh and blood. And if he wasn't Arthur Gable, then he was something else. Something that wore his face. The day of my discharge finally came. Chloe was the one who came with the wheelchair. Her hands trembled slightly as she helped me into it. "We're going to take a different way out," she said, her voice strained. "The main elevator is being serviced." I knew she was lying. Her eyes kept flicking toward the waiting room. As she pushed my chair into the hallway, I couldn't resist. I had to look. He was there. And this time, it was different. He wasn't staring at the doorway anymore. He was staring directly at me as my wheelchair rolled past. He stood up, slowly, deliberately. His movements were fluid, not like the frail old man I remembered. It was him. It was Arthur Gable's face, but the eyes were wrong. They were cold, clear, and filled with a burning, possessive hatred. He took a step toward me. My breath hitched in my throat. "That's my bed," he said. His voice wasn't the weak rasp of a pneumonia patient. It was strong, clear, and utterly chilling. "You're not supposed to leave." He took another step, and his shirt collar shifted slightly. For a split second I saw it, a thin white scar running vertically down his neck and disappearing below the fabric. Not the scar of a man with pneumonia. It was the kind of scar someone gets when their chest is cracked open. "Don't look at him," Chloe hissed in my ear, her grip on the wheelchair handles tightening like a vice. She spun the chair around and pushed, not walking, but practically running down a side corridor I'd never seen before. We clattered through a set of service doors and into a grimy loading bay. "What is going on?" I gasped, my mind reeling. "The man who died wasn't Arthur Gable," Chloe said in a frantic, hushed torrent of words, pushing me toward an open door. "It was his twin brother, Thomas. He came in with a fake ID using his brother's identity. He needed an emergency heart transplant, but he was a non-candidate, no insurance, bad history. A surgeon here. He did it off the books. A ghost surgery, but Thomas died on the table." She fumbled with the door, pushing it open to the outside world. "The man you saw, the real Arthur Gable, he's insane with grief. He thinks this hospital, that surgeon, stole his brother's life. He thinks that room, his brother's room, is owed something. The hospital is trying to keep a lid on it, to manage him until he goes away." She pushed my wheelchair out into the jarringly bright afternoon and slammed the service door shut behind us, leaving me alone on the curb. The hospital officially denied everything. Chloe was fired for gross misconduct and spreading malicious falsehoods. They said I was suffering from post-traumatic stress. They said Arthur Gable was a grieving man who was simply visiting the place where his brother passed. It's been 6 months. I walk with a cane now. I moved to an apartment on the other side of the city. I tell myself it's over, but sometimes, when I'm walking home at night, I feel it. That same prickling sensation of being watched. I look over my shoulder and I'll see a figure standing in a distant doorway or across the street, just outside the pool of the street lamp's glow. I can never make out the face. I don't need to. I know it's him, and I know he's not just grieving anymore. He's waiting. If you thought that medical emergency was the most frightening thing you'd hear, think again. We're about to uncover another true account that will make you rethink every visit. For a college student, volunteering at St. Jude's long-term care facility was an easy way to rack up community service hours. My assignment was room 3B. The patient was a Jane Doe, a woman who had been in a coma for 10 years following what the charts called a tragic car accident. She had no known family, no visitors. She was just a body in a bed, kept alive by the quiet, rhythmic sigh of a ventilator and the slow, steady drip of an IV bag. My job was to read to her. The nurses said it might stimulate brain activity. I didn't really believe it, but I did it anyway. For weeks, my Tuesday afternoons were spent in the hushed, sterile quiet of that room, reading chapters of whatever paperback I had on hand. The only sounds were my own voice, the whisper of the machines, and the distant, muffled sounds of the hospital ward. One Tuesday, something felt different. The air was heavy, static. The rhythmic beep of her heart monitor seemed faster, just a few beats per minute, but enough to notice. I dismissed it as a machine calibration, a power flicker. But as I read, I felt a strange prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. I looked up. The woman's eyes were closed, her face as placid as ever. Still, the feeling lingered. I continued reading, my voice a little less confident now. The chapter was ending. I read the final sentence, closed the book, and placed it on the bedside table. The silence that followed was absolute. Then her hand shot out and grabbed my arm. The strength was shocking. A vise-like grip from a body that shouldn't have been able to move. Her eyes, which I'd never seen before, were wide open, a brilliant, terrified blue. They weren't hazy or unfocused. They were sharp, lucid, and filled with a decade of silent screaming. Her lips peeled back from her teeth, and a sound like dry leaves scraping on pavement filled the room. It was her voice, a dry, unused rasp. He told me if I ever woke up, she rasped, her grip tightening on my arm. He'd finished the job. My heart stopped. My blood turned to ice. Who? I managed to whisper. My husband, she breathed, her eyes darting frantically toward the hallway. He's a doctor, on this floor. At that exact moment, I heard it. Confident. Squeaking footsteps of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, coming down the hall. A doctor's footsteps. And they were heading directly for our room. My mind was a chaotic storm. This woman, this Jane Doe, was supposed to be a vegetable. Was this real? A hallucination? A miracle? Her grip felt real. The terror in her eyes was undeniably real. The approaching footsteps were real. The door swung open, and a man in a crisp white coat stepped inside. He was handsome, in a severe clinical way, with silvering temples and a smile that seemed practiced. Perfect. It was Dr. Cole, the head of the neurology department. I'd seen him on the floor before, a respected, almost revered figure. He was known for his calm, authoritative bedside manner. His professional smile widened when he saw me. Then his eyes fell on the woman. On her wide awake eyes, on her hand clutching my arm. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. The mask slipped before the amazement and disbelief flooded his features. I saw something else in his eyes. A flicker of pure, cold fury. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a flawless performance of medical astonishment. My God, he breathed, rushing to the other side of the bed. Catherine, can you hear me? It's a miracle. The woman, Catherine, let out a small whimpering sound and shrank away from him, her grip on my arm becoming painfully tight. It's all right, my love, Dr. Cole said, his voice dripping with false tenderness. He looked at me, his eyes now conveying a look of shared professional concern. She's obviously disoriented. 10 years is a long time. The neural pathways are bound to be scrambled. He reached for the IV drip, his back to me. I'm just going to give her a mild sedative. Help with the transition. The shock could be too much for her system. He told me he'd finished the job. Catherine's whisper was a desperate mantra against my skin. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that she was telling the truth. And I knew that whatever was in that syringe Dr. Cole was now preparing was not a sedative. It was a conclusion. I had to do something. I couldn't scream. He would just say I was a hysterical, panicking volunteer. He was the doctor. I was a kid. Who would they believe? My eyes darted around the room, looking for anything. My gaze landed on the heart monitor. The code blue button, as Dr. Cole turned, syringe in hand. I did the only thing I could think of. I looked him straight in the eye and slammed my hand down on the large red button. Instantly, the room was filled with a deafening, frantic alarm of a cardiac arrest. The overhead speakers blared. Code blue, room 3B. Code blue, room 3B. Dr. Cole froze, his face a mask of incandescent rage. He had a split second to make a choice. Plunge the needle into his wife's arm, with the entire floor about to descend on us, or maintain his cover. He dropped the syringe. "What have you done?" he hissed, his voice no longer smooth and charming, With a low, venomous growl, the door burst open, and two nurses and an orderly fluttered in, their eyes wide, expecting to see a patient flatlining. Instead, they saw a patient who had been in a coma for a decade, awake and terrified, clutching my arm, and the head of neurology standing over her with a look of pure murder on his face. The confusion in the room was a tangible thing. Dr. Cole tried to regain control, shouting orders, but it was too late. I was already shouting what Catherine had told me, that he was her husband, that he was trying to kill her. It was chaos. Security was called. The aftermath was a slow, horrifying unraveling. The police found the substance in the discarded syringe. It wasn't a sedative. It was a massive, lethal dose of potassium chloride. The investigation into Catherine's car accident 10 years ago was reopened. It turned out her brake lines had been expertly cut. Dr. Martin Cole, a respected physician, had tried to murder his wife for her inheritance, and had spent the last 10 years as her caretaker at the hospital, a position that gave him the perfect cover to ensure she never woke up to tell the tale. Catherine was moved to a different facility, under a new name. The physical recovery was slow, but the psychological damage was immense. She remembered everything. 10 years of being a prisoner in her own body, hearing her husband's voice, feeling his presence, unable to scream. I try to tell myself that I saved her, but sometimes, late at night, I think about how close I came to being part of the story. The tragic footnote. The poor volunteer who was in the room when the long-term patient's heart finally, inexplicably, gave out. Dr. Cole was convicted. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. But last month, a letter arrived at my apartment. It had no return address, but had been postmarked from the city where the state penitentiary is located. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper. On it was a short, typed message. A good doctor has friends everywhere, and a man with my skills can always find a way to return a favor.